If you've watched Battle Camper before, you probably know my cat and executive producer, Boo. She is an agent of purest chaos, and whilst I wouldn't have it any other way, I'm not entirely sure what she contributes to the creative process. She's been around a little longer than the channel has, and when I go away I always regret that I can't take this furry hurricane with me.
Oh my god! Well, that was obviously going to happen, wasn't it? You're such a bastard.
Well, in November we welcomed Boo's new sister, Key, to the household and more importantly, the channel. And let's just say Boo was not impressed. Regardless of Boo's views, it did mean I needed to test whether it was a feasible proposition that I could paint in the back of a micro camper van whilst sharing that space with a dog that can weigh up to 32 kilograms. Welcome to Battle Camper. Well, I guess the first challenge happens before you even leave the house. As well as having to pack miniatures and filming supplies, hobby supplies and more hobby supplies, you also have an ungodly amount of dog stuff to pack. This is of course on top of all the stuff that a normal person would actually need for camping. This meant I had to clear some of the detritus out of the back of the van. The usual stuff, including a bike helmet, mortgage documents, old bedding, old COVID tests, and a gift bag full of teas brought all the way from India. With that eventually sorted, my next job was simply to despair at the fact that this van had to hold me and the dog for the next night and leave enough room for me to live and paint. In what some might consider to be an ill omen before setting off, I realised that a panel had fallen off the side of my van. Not to worry, I would simply apply my advanced primate brain to fixing it. It was then finally time for Key's Battle Camper debut.
Ready for an adventure? We're going to go paint elves! We're going to go paint elves!
As I mentioned to Key, we're going to be painting elves this weekend. Well, just the one elf, actually. You may remember that last year I painted my Rohan army in the Highlands of Scotland and they debuted at the Scouring of Cheshire 2022. It was legitimately one of my favourite weekends of the year, and I'm very excited to have tickets to the 2023 event. I figured I'd continue this one-year tradition by painting a new army for it, so I'll be taking Lothlorien and Rivendell in a combined elves list. I painted a test mini already in the form of a Galadhrim warrior using non-metallic metal, gold and steel. My only objective for this weekend was to replicate that on a new Galadhrim warrior, whilst caring for what might turn out to be evolution's most temperamental byproduct.
You're so in the way.
Whilst waiting for this guy to put his shoes on so I can leave the car park, I'll describe a little bit about the weekend's itinerary. I don't want to go far in case it's a disaster or the puppy really doesn't enjoy things, so I can scramble home. However, I also want to head somewhere that celebrates this project's wood elfy theme. Fortunately, I know just the place. Epping Forest, otherwise known as the Cockney Paradise. It is London's largest open green space and is quite a remarkable sight. Over the dense and expansive canopy of autumnal leaves, you can see in the distance the City of London. Its skyscrapers sit juxtaposed against this beautiful natural resource. There's probably something poetic I could have said there if I'd had either the inclination or the foresight. Anyway, back to the shoes. He did eventually get them on, and it was time for us to head out. But first, a brief stop at Tesco's just for the essentials. I then had one last stop to make, under the guise of wanting lunch for myself, but actually because I wanted to know if the legends were true and puppuccinos were real. They were, and Key was pretty thrilled.
Right then. This is a treat. Your very first pop cup. Look at her little chops. Covered in cream. I really hope you're not lactose intolerant, dude.
We'd find out the answer to that last question from the activity of her bowels over the next 24 hours. In the meantime, on the way to Epping Forest, we had quite a lot of traffic to get stuck in. Never mind, Key was happy enough, and it gives me a brief opportunity to apologise to my supporters and subscribers for failing to upload in quite a long time. You've all been exceptionally patient with me, for which I'm grateful. I know a lot of you are due dice and dice bags, and I have a backlog of gifts to raffle off. But the house has been moved into, the dog has been welcomed, I'm ready to get back into gear. So all that's left is to thank Sam Starrett, Farm to Tabletop, Dave Taylor, who bought a whole year subscription in one go, and Gidges, whose name I can't pronounce. Your generosity leaves me genuinely bewildered at times. Anyway, we arrived in Epping Forest at the car park that I'd identified as my overnight stay location. However, on arrival, there were several issues.
I don't know what you're so proud of yourself about. You have shredded, absolutely shredded, My gear stick! Don't paw me like that! Oh, why are you so irresistibly cute? I can't stay angry at you. You are biting my hand now. That, you've actually just fucking shredded it. I haven't even started yet, and she's destroyed one of my USB leads. I didn't do any puppy proofing in here. Rookie error. I mean, I am a rookie, but still. No, she's about to destroy the other one. I'm gonna have to charge things in here. What the fuck am I gonna do? Doggo! At least I guess whenever I use it now, I'll be reminded of you.
And it wasn't over yet. The apparently good overnight stop car park didn't have a very welcoming vibe about it. Well, I thought I'd pay and stay for a while. I could always find somewhere else to stay overnight, and I resolved to gripe about it later on the internet. And bear in mind, this amount of stuff is for one night. One night! In the new year, I'm going away for 2 weeks. I genuinely don't know how that's going to work yet. It was then finally time to head off into the woods to find somewhere to paint. Key had a fantastic time en route, snuffling about, running about, making eye contact at the least appropriate moments. I then found this great little clearing, an open, secluded and flat space that would serve as perfect inspiration for my wood elves, and Key showed how she intended to contribute to the creative process.
So in this stint, I'm going to try and keep things relatively simple. We're going to be doing cloaks. So the cloaks on these elves, as you can see from my test elf, I want them to be not turquoise, but to transition through turquoise from base green to high blue. So the first thing we need to do is just make sure that the base coat is nice and strong. Base coat is Caliban green. Oh, bloody hell.
You'll see the elf has already been base coated a bit, just to make things super easy, but they do need to be base coated more.
Key, can you just... Key, hey, give me my wood elves back. Give me my wood elves.
So nothing particularly exciting here, we're just getting a nice smooth base of Caliban green. As you can see, while I'm getting this done, Key is very reliably entertaining herself, like a good girl. This gave me a good chance to reflect as well, and as my first proper miniature painting road trip since July, I cannot tell you how good this felt.
No. Look, let's not... You're meant to go and entertain yourself, yeah? And I paint the minis. Yeah, I know. You, dog, me, miniature painter. Okay? Next paint is just the wash Coella green shade, which will start to give us the turquoisey hue, which will be good for the transition. And later what we'll do is we'll glaze back down to the dark green with Baltan green, and we're going to be highlighting up to the blue. So Coella is basically transitional context. And I'm basically just hoping that me using phrases like transitional context paint makes me sound like I know what the fuck I'm doing. She is not making too much of a fuss. She's just entertaining herself. She's not gone chasing anyone off.
I was clearly very pleased with myself for how this was all going, but on the dog score at least, I may have spoken too soon.
Oh. No! Key! No! Leave that. Leave that! Key! Leave it, please. Key! 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 Oh my god, no. I've just got my box of miniatures. Key! Hey! Key! Here! Key! Here, right now. Come here. Sit! Key! Key, come here, right now.
With my already fragile authority vanishing by the second, it was time to switch up my tactics and try to outsmart her.
Key, come on! Key! Come here, come on! Key! Come on! Come on! Good girl! Good girl! Okay, good girl. Now sit down. That's mine! That's mine! That's mine! She's destroyed it. You bloody idiot. No! 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 Jesus! Let go! Right, it's going back in the bag, because you can't touch it in the bag.
Anyway, with the wash down, we opted for a game of fetch, both to try and curtail her energy, and also to allow the model to try.
Okay, you brought back the wrong... I mean, it's a stick, but I don't think that's the point in fetch. This isn't a trade. And I'm trying to upcycle the stick. Because it just... Sit.
After fetch, we headed back to the van and stumbled across the Lodge Road Bog, an ancient body of water. The material on the bed can be dated back to the Stone Age. It is also home to some exceptionally rare plants in the UK, including the round-leaved sundew. This is unusual for these parts because it's carnivorous. It uses glue to trap dragonflies and other insects. I loved Epping Forest. I'm surprised I've lived so close for so long without ever visiting. It's also something we just shouldn't take for granted. In the 19th century it risked destruction, but it was purchased and saved by the City of London Corporation in what is seen as a landmark moment in the European environmental movement. Its age, scale and dramatically varying terrain types make it a real treat to explore. It has a very Lord of the Ringsy feel to it, which is perhaps why in 2009 it played host to 2 cult hit, fan-made Lord of the Rings productions. Born of Hope tells the story of a young Aragorn taken from a few paragraphs in the Lord of the Rings appendices. It was shot in part on the very path that Key just shat on, but no disrespect intended. Hunt for Gollum is about Gandalf and Aragorn's, Hunt for Gollum. Both are available on YouTube. Anyway, it was time to get back to what I was really here for, spending an inordinate amount of time painting one elf. We picked this up by painting a 50-50 mix of Caliban green and Cabalite green very broadly over the raised areas on the cloak.
We're now using mostly Cabalite, so it'll be a touch of the base Caliban left in there.
The trick with this early colours, which I'll be the first person to admit I've not yet mastered, is doing it broadly enough so that you still have plenty of room to complete the transition from green to blue, which takes a lot of layers. If you don't give yourself enough room by doing too focused highlights early on, then it'll be very difficult to complete that process. The next green to add to the mix was Sybarite green.
You can see the Sybarite is really bright. Why don't we talk a little bit about what I plan for my elves? Because I'm very, very excited to really be choosing a Middle-earth army for the first time. And I say that because as much as I love my Rohan and the Ents I took because I needed to be able to paint something very, very quickly, and so having a handful of models was good. And also going to my first event while filming, having only 6 models on the table means that if I'm messing about with the camera, I'm not stealing too much time from my opponent because I can take my turns very quickly. The Rohan was basically just because I bought the intro box and my friend took the Orcs, so I took the Rohan. So this is the first time I've really just thought, you know what army do I actually really want to play? And decided I really want to play elves. We're up to more Sybarite now, but we still want to mix it down quite carefully because it's still going to be a very, very powerful colour, and we do not want it to be too stark. I'm also not going all the way up at the cloak anymore because we're going to focus the bluiness towards the bottom.
I've really taken my time on the cloak, and that's because with this recipe I'm very aware that the cloak and the gold will make it or break it. Essentially everything else is padding.
Alright, with the Sybarite down, we're basically done with the greens. I've made the mistake I usually make, which is I've been too focused too early, so it makes it really hard to get a natural transition from green to blue. But there you go, we're still in early days, we're still practicing this recipe, we will get there. For the moment, we're just going to plough ahead, and we're going to move on to Timpleguard Blue and start mixing that in with the Sybarite.
This is the moment when you find out whether or not you've laid the groundwork well enough and whether the blue is going to work or just look a bit weird. In my case, I've left too much of the cloak too dark, so it just looks a bit stark and a bit weird, but I fix that later by filling in some of the mid-tones, and that helps a lot.
Last, it is time for a spot highlight of Fenrisian Grey.
I think the spot highlight adds something really quite nice. I'm not sure the cloak ever came out as looking like it goes from green to blue rather than simply shades of turquoise, but I like it nonetheless. To help capture some of the green saturation, what I do now is go and form a glaze out of Bile Tan green and just glaze that onto the low light areas. After that, it was time to pack up and head to an overnight spot before I was prosecuted by the fantastically odd political entity that is the City of London Corporation. First, the arduous task of packing away, which ended up taking longer than the drive itself. My second attempt at an overnight stop would be in Broxbourne Wood. Definitely not as grand, but it's a nature reserve and site of special scientific interest. I was confident it would have sufficient splendour for this mini weekend adventure. I couldn't see much on arrival, but it seemed like a secluded area to park with no restrictions in place. There was another camper van with its lights on, which I assumed meant I'd have company for the evening. On arrival, I took Key for a walk so she could have a poo and a whittle, and I tried not to lose her in the dark, and then realised just how desperate the need is to find some clever solutions to keeping the van clean on longer trips.
Well, this is our bed for the evening. First of the next tasks, if that follows, first of the next, is to use the excellent Plyar Glacier, whatever, the new cold blue wash from Games Workshop on the whites.
I've not tried this before, but I really like the look of this paint, and I'm hoping to get a sort of magic-y bluey hue to the white cloth, which should tie it in with the blue of the cloak. The base coat for the white was Gracier. I decided to just round out all the washes for the parts that I'll be doing this evening, so I went to Null Oil to wash the rust grey base coating on the chainmail. I used Reichland Flesh Shade on the detailless pancake face and hands. They had been based in Bugman's Glow. I then used Agrex Earthshade on the leathers, which is just the handle to the sword, and the boots. I also used this on the hair, which I'd based in Dryad Bark. The leathers had been based in Doomball Brown, mixed 50-50 with Rhinox Hide.
You're going to have to move up. You just are. Well then, dude. So the next thing to do, dog? Yeah? Is... we're going to mix up some Administratum with that rust grey. We're going to start highlighting the scales, okay? Yeah, good.
So I'm now just trying to pick out the scales with this mix. Now I'm going to be the first person to say I find painting non-metallic metal scales extraordinarily difficult. That isn't helped by these 20-year-old sculpts where a lot of the scales just sort of blend into each other. My aim is therefore that these just look passable. They don't need to be brilliant, they just need to not ruin the effect on the rest of the model. They're not going to draw the eye, and I'm basically just treating this as practice, something I need to get better at. I add more and more Administratum and then Ulthman Grey and focus the lighter colours towards the centre of the model. Within the context of the model, this ends up being sufficient so that you know at least that it is meant to be metal. This is an important lesson for me to learn, particularly when trying new techniques over which I feel a bit self-conscious, which is that not every feature needs to look amazing. Within the context of the model, the feature needs to look okay, and of course that model needs to look okay within the context of the army. At the early stages of a new project, when you're not particularly happy with it and looking for motivation, it can be really helpful to keep in mind that an army almost always looks greater than the sum of its parts. Anyway, whatever. After the scales, I returned to the whites and began by basing back up with Gracier. I then applied some quite liberal highlights with Ulthwan Grey, and you will know what's next.
Finally, of course, we need a nice, sharp white highlight. Next, we're back to the tub for face paints. Not face paints, but paints for faces. The base. Oh, eyes.
If you've watched my Necromunda video, you know that I do eyes first now, and it has changed the game for me. The first eye went pretty well. The second eye didn't go quite as well.
It was just on the armour plate.
Okay, so the skin's not going to look very good, and this isn't just me being falsely modest. It's not my fault at all. It is Games Workshop's fault for not re-releasing these kits in a more modern format. I'm sorry to people who get doe-eyed over the 20-year-old infantry kits for Lord of the Rings, but they're not perfect. The iceberg lettuce hands and the pancake faces are almost impossible to work with. All I did was poke them with various flesh tones until eventually they looked passable. I'm thinking for the future, I might just pick up some Gulliman Flesh contrast paint and be done with it. I can then focus my skin painting efforts on the new resin and plastic heroes, which do look fantastic and are a joy to work with. I then highlighted the hair using Balor Brown and Baneblade Brown. I then did the leathers, and I basically just used a mix of Doomball Brown and Xandri Dust, increasingly adding more Xandri Dust until eventually it was a sharp highlight. I used to do much redder leathers with Reikland Flesh Shade as the wash and Tuskor Fur as the highlight, but I quite like how aged the Xandri Dust makes it look. Much more worn and much more real.
There we go. Give the leathers a bit of a shine. Maybe I take this opportunity just to describe a little bit about why it is I decided to get a dog when it already takes me so long to paint anything. I mean, I take forever over my painting, even over relatively simple things, and the strange thing is that's just not like me at all. Now, when it comes to other daily activities, like, oh, I don't know, walking the dog.
Alright, let's get this done.
Cooking.
Let's get this done.
Sex.
Let's get this done.
But with painting, I'm willing to spend, well, an entire weekend on one little plastic miniature. So adding a dog into the mix and slowing things down a little bit more doesn't make an enormous difference to me, because it was essentially what I was doing anyway. Spending forever faffing about. That's why I got the van and did it in the van and paint up a mountain or on a beach. It's all a massive faff. It inflates the time considerably, but what can I say? It fits with my painting philosophy, I guess.
Having painted everything except for the steel of the sword blade and the gold armour, and espoused on my half-assed painting philosophy, it was time for me to pack up and head to bed. Key was probably understandably perturbed by the way the bed cascaded out towards her face, but once it was deployed, she settled down quickly enough for our first night cohabiting in the van. After a surprisingly successful lie-in, we went for a walk. My bladder was the first to give out, but Keys wasn't much after. We then ran across another golden retriever, and there was some grade A frolicking going on. Although this really put a strain on my fragile van dog cleaning procedure.
Time to crack on with some painting. At last. Now I keep having to hide the miniature up here, otherwise the dog will eat it. We're going to start with the metal on the sword. Boop. So, what we did is we undercoated it Administratum Grey, and the first thing we're going to do is create a mix of Administratum and a little bit of Dark Reaper. Now for anyone, for both this recipe and for the gold recipe, thinking, hang on, I recognise that somewhere, all I'll say is I make no claim to this being my recipe. Now obviously the point is to create opposite areas of contrast. So on one side of the blade, on the flat of the blade, we're creating it up to the middle here. And then on the other side of the blade, on the edge itself, the dark patch is going to be in the middle and the light patch up towards the edges. Right, that's us down to Dark Reaper, so now it is time to invite Ulthuan Grey to the party. And lo and behold, we're basically just going to be doing the opposite. Ulthuan is there, propping that up for some reason. So let's start a new mix.
I may be a long way from a non-metallic metal pro, but I'm really enjoying practicing it and seeing the technique come together. If it's something you've been thinking about doing, I encourage you to take the plunge.
I'm now using pure Ulthuan to highlight the edges of the blade.
I must admit, doing the highlighting on these blades does kind of freak me out, particularly doing the ridge between the flat and the edge of the blade, where it's really easy to make the highlight either too fat or too wobbly, neither of which are ideal contributors to the overall effect. I finished up with some more select highlights of pure white, and then it was done. We're then onto the main event, the gold armour. This had been based in a mix of Balor Brown and XV88, and I now began the process of laying out the highlights with a mix of Balor Brown and Zamizi Desert. To be honest, I'm not thinking too hard about where the highlight and the light is going. The armor panels are so small on these minis, I think there's a certain extent to which less is more. I'm basically just doing one big highlight therefore down the center of the model. And I'm developing that now by adding a shabty bone into the mix. After this, it's back to Doombull Brown and it's back to glazing. Obviously, this is for the low lights, and obviously we're just plopping them down in the opposite places to the highlights. This colour is going to get darker as we add tiny bits of Abaddon Black into the mix, and as it does get darker, I'll also use it as a recess shade just to try and separate out those panels.
That has made an enormous difference. It's actually starting to look like it could be non-metallic metal gold now.
There you go, that's how low I've set the bar for myself. As long as it kind of looks like it could be non-metallic metal gold, then I'm giving myself a big old pat on the back. You'll also see the finger coming into play a lot in these clips. I'm an endless corrections kind of painter, but at least when you're glazing, you really do have that option. Next, it was time to edge highlight all the panels, and I just did this with pure Shabti bone. And now this bit really does sort of stress me out, because the highlights really pull all the colours together and breathe fresh life into the effect, but if you get it wrong and make the highlights too thick or wavy, it's going to look awful. So again, you'll see some quick and cheeky fingering to get rid of the errors.
We are miraculously very close now. It's time for dots and spots. So dots and spots of both black and white to get darkest shadows and those bright dashes of light.
This step is satisfying when it goes right and mortifying when it goes wrong. As you can see, I put quite a big splotch on one of these panels and it covers up almost all of the dark patches I've spent about an hour building up. I will say, at the risk of being called a shill, kudos to Games Workshop for creating this quite accessible gold recipe. Might as well quickly mention what the rest of my army is going to be, since it's all purchased and ready for assembly. It's a joint Rivendell and Lothlorien list, with Elrond with 5 knights, then Rúmil, Haldir and a Galadhrim captain with a mix of Wood Elves and Galadhrim, a pair of Sentinels and 6 Guard of the Fountain Court. I've never played with them before, but I do look forward to giving it a whirl.
Right, now comes the bit that really does genuinely scare me, because it is about applying paint over everything we've already done. So we're trying to recapture some of the saturation to make it look more like red and yellow rather than brown and bone, and that should make it shine and make it look more like animated poppy gold.
So I started by watering down Blood Angel's Red into a glaze, and I had to go back to the water pot over and over again because I constantly underestimated the strength of the colour. Once I had it, I started glazing very carefully, because this can quickly overwhelm all the work that we've done so far and just turn it back into red and yellow. Perhaps out of cowardice, I only did a single glaze with the red and a single glaze with the Iriel yellow. This meant the underneath colours showed through and ended up with quite a pastel-y gold.
Okay, please don't ruin it now. We're done. I went back to my reference model afterwards and I realised that the golds were really quite different. This one on the left is the old one and the gold is dirtier. I think I was bolder with the darker browns. And this one on the right is reddier. Now when this first kind of came off the assembly line just a few moments ago, I felt like this was definitely the better model. So I went back and I touched up with a Shabti bone because I thought there was too much saturation. I could afford to go back to a sort of more pastel-y colour. And then I also redid the white highlights because they'd all been tainted by the glazes. And now I've got 2 that still look different. We've still got a drier, sort of dirtier gold on the left and a reddier gold on the right. I consider the reddier gold to probably be a bit more Galadhrim-ish. So I'll probably go with this one going forward, and he'll blend in eventually, so not too bad.
So there we have it. I managed to paint 1 whole miniature over an entire weekend. Well done me. We celebrated with a walk through the woods, and me and Key went and explored a local nature reserve. This is Danemead Nature Reserve, an area famous for its thriving colonies of butterflies, not that they're out at this time of year. Key had an absolute blast, and therefore vicariously so did I through her. We found a stream, an excellent stick, and did plenty of mindless belting about the place. Overall, this was meant to be an experiment about taking the dog away and still managing to do some hobby, and I think it was a success. There's definitely kinks in the armour to be worked out, including how I keep the dog and therefore the van clean, and how I organise my space more effectively so I can actually live and not lose my mind over longer trips. I best get my thinking cap on, because in just a few weeks I'm going on my longest trip ever. I'm going to be continuing the elf project by painting all of my characters in the Hebrides. This island chain to the west of Scotland is meant to be one of the UK's most beautiful places. I'll continue to make the case that Scotland is the perfect setting for filming Middle-earth content, and I'm going to track down an animal in the flesh that has become emblematic of stories in Middle-earth, the gold eagle. January is a great time to go and find them, as they come out more and more ahead of mating season. I actually can't wait for this trip, hunting down some spectacular wildlife, just me, the dog, and a pile of miniatures. I'm also hoping to stop at Edinburgh for New Year, because apparently they do it bigger and better than anyone else. If you fancy supporting the channel, please do click on the Buy Me a Coffee link below. I promise to blow your hard-earned cash on an adorable holiday costume for Key. Otherwise, at least, do a subscribe or whatever, and thank you very much indeed for watching.
Should we see your handiwork with the poor reindeer, Key? Oh my god, it's been shredded.
That's not the only thing she destroyed. She also destroyed this wallet, this cushion that my grandmother made, this power lead for an obscure gaming laptop which cost me £100 to replace, this belt which she fully chewed in half, my nice expensive work shoes, and this lamp which my uncle bought me for Christmas. All this and more in less than a month. You know that I normally include an outtake at the end of these videos, and my favourite one from this video isn't actually a video, but it's an audio. At the beginning of this video, you might remember that I said that Boo was an agent of purest chaos. Well, this is what happened when I tried to record it the first time. She is an agent of purest chaos. It's okay. That was her jumping from that pillow behind me, you can see, onto the board games, and then falling off, and all the board games came off with her. And then she realised that Key was in the room, and so sprinted off behind the computer.